This particular kit we're going to install on the back of this Winnebago on a Ford chassis. It's a Ford F53 18,000 pound GVW. That's going to be listed in the applications guide. If somebody calls and they say, I have a Ford, well, what's a GVW? And that's on a placard that's usually on the wall right next to the driver. And they'll be able to read that and tell you what the GVW is. That'll tell you which kit to get. F53 doesn't mean that because there's two kits for F53s depending on what the GVW is. This particular kit, we're going to bolt this onto the underneath where the sway bar goes. And where to go? This other part goes over and attaches to the frame that way, and then we connect the two with a rod. And it's what we're trying to do here, of course, is tie the frame to the axle. So it's all basically bolt on. We take bolts off of the sway bar, we put new bolts in, and we supply the bolts because when we add a spacer to it, we add length, so then we give new bolts to go on there. So they discard the original bolts in this case. The instructions indicate when we do and when we don't use the old bolts. In most cases, it's all new when we put it together. This one goes on to the frame. There's already two holes in the frame rail where this bolts, so you can't put it on wrong. And when we put it on, we put a spacer plate on the back, on the outside of the frame, and then the bolts through, and it's sandwiched between the frame. That way, that little small head won't be pulled through the material of the frame. This is just like a great big flat washer to help support that. The notch is in there specifically because some Fords have an interference to where if you put a flat plate on there, it's not going to fit. It's not all of them, but most of them do. So this notch is in there so that you can miss that little plate. We have it on this side too, but that was just convenient, so we only cut one part. It's the outside where the interference may be. The construction of this, unlike most products that are on the market, these are normally made out of just plain mild steel that you buy, which is called A36. We make these out of an A572, which is almost twice the tensile strength as what A36 is. It's the same alloy material they use to make the frame of a Kenworth or whatever out of, okay? And it's 3/8 in thickness. Most people use 1/4 inch. So we're heavier there. Our rod assembly that goes on, it's adjustable here so that when you put it on, you have to adjust for length a little bit. You'll notice in this one it has two holes in it. We find between the lighter, the 14, 16, and 18, there's a difference sometimes where they weld the bracket onto the differential. So when this goes on, it could be this way or this way. So the two holes are there to accommodate the rod depending on the chassis, okay? The tubing we use on this is, unlike most of them that use a light-duty welded seam tubing or pipe, this is a cold drawn over mandrel DOM tubing that's almost 1/4 inch wall thick, and then we actually tap the inside of this for this to go in, rather than weld a nut on and use a standard bolt. And then we use an alloy thread on here. So the construction all the way through all of the product is built that way. The instructions say, if I can remember this now, and I'll do it the way the instructions say, they say to remove this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and this bolt to move the sway bar up out of the way. But it also cautions you, don't take all 4 bolts out because that sway bar is heavy and it'll fall down. So we do one side at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and take those bolts out. Okay, now I'll loosen the other side so that I can maneuver it. Now we're going to take this bracket here. We're going to see if we can move the sway bar up out of the way and slide this thing in here. Okay, that goes up like that. And we'll put the horseshoe back on. And we'll take a new bolt that's supplied. These bolts on the side of this bracket here that I'm holding up, square-headed bolts, okay, they thread into the side of this bracket here and here and up here and here. That's in there so we can tighten them down against this channel that's welded to the axle. And when those are tightened down, that stops any movement of this bracket moving back and forth. But before I put those on there, I'm going to put a drop of Loctite on the threads. Okay, I got that on there. Now I can take and tighten these. Snug those down pretty good so they make good contact. And then the Loctite will lock them there so they don't come out. On this side over here, which is the passenger side, we're just going to put a spacer in here so that the sway bar doesn't get in a bind. Now we're going to put this spacer in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this outside frame bracket on. Over here on this side right here, I'm putting the head of the bolt on the outside so we don't have that long part of the thread sticking out and interfering with any possible suspension travel. Now, sometimes there's a bracket in here that interferes, and if there is, that's why the notch is cut in that backing plate. In this case, there's no interference. This is typically what installers will do, but we have torque specs for every bolt, and I have a torque wrench, and when we get through I'll double check the torque. I'm going to adjust and put the rod assembly on here, see which hole it's going to fit. Yeah, it should be the other way around here because I want that bend to be in the center of the differential for clearance. Okay, that's loosely assembled on that end. Okay, that's going to go back there, but I have to turn this in and adjust the length of it. So that it lines up so the bolt will go through there. I think I'll do this way and this way because I want a flat washer on either side of the bushing. Okay? And now we put the nut on, and now it's a matter of tightening the bolts, the nuts. Frame bracket, axle bracket, and rod assembly. Now, we got to remember to come up here when you're through and tighten this jam nut here. And the last thing we do when we finish things up is double check the torque with the torque wrench, torque all bolts specification. And then when you take a look at the installation, make sure there isn't any brake lines, hoses, cables, or anything that would be interference with the track bar once it's put on, and use the supplied snap ties to loom them up out of the way so we don't have any interference. And that would complete the installation.